Hey folks, welcome to something completely different. This is a Spongebob Squarepants Season 1 review/retrospective. What I'm planning to do is go through each episode of the first season of Spongebob Squarepants, a show very near and dear to my heart. I grew up with this show. I was born in 1992. I'm currently 30 as of the recording of this video. Very special series to me. I have a lot of very good memories growing up with me and my sister, and just I have the box set of this first season. I was in that SpongeBob mania at that time when it was just really huge. It's still a big show today. It's still ongoing. It's amazing the amount of success it has, but I wanted to kind of revisit this first season and maybe go through at least the first 4 seasons and talk about some of the episodes, just kind of give a brief summary and my overall thoughts. So, without further ado, let's dive into it a little bit. So, Season 1 starts off with a 3-part episode. You have 1A, which is the pilot, Help Wanted. You have 1B, which is Reef Blower, which is a little short in between. And then you have the first regular syndication episode, which is Tea at the Tree Dome. That's not a pilot. You know, just sort of the first real episode, if you want to call it that. So, we'll start off with Help Wanted. Help Wanted is the pilot. It debuted in 1999, I believe, after the Kids' Choice Awards of that year, sometime in July. I believe I saw it, but I don't remember. I feel like I remember it because it seemed like it was a big deal. But I don't remember if I saw it when it came out or not. It was probably advertised like nuts. I just saw recently there was a promo for SpongeBob for when it first came out, and I don't specifically remember it, but it feels familiar. So, honestly, I don't know if I saw it live or not, but it is possible. I think being right after the Kids' Choice Awards, it was definitely possible, because I did watch the Kids' Choice Awards. I loved the Kids' Choice Awards back in the day. They were really cool. But Help Wanted is the pilot, and it establishes a lot of things. It establishes at least 5 of the main characters. We have SpongeBob, we have Gary, we have Patrick, we have Squidward, and we have Mr. Krabs. We also have the anchovies, but they're just kind of a recurring sort of meme-type background character for the next couple of episodes. In fact, I don't remember if beyond the first season if they make much of an appearance even in the background. Maybe just as static background characters, but they don't really go beyond that. But the basic premise is SpongeBob is getting ready for his day. He is preparing to apply for a job at the Krusty Krab, and hilarity ensues, basically. If you haven't seen it, alright, first of all, I'm gonna just put a disclaimer here. This is going to be some spoilers, spoilers for old SpongeBob. If you haven't seen old SpongeBob yet, what are you doing? You're missing out on something really special. But just spoiler alert for this. I don't even know how old this show is now. I'm not even going to bother doing the math, but oh man, and it's still going. But if you haven't started watching SpongeBob yet, go do it. Start with episode 1, season 1. Go from seasons 1 to 4. I know some people might say cut it off at 3. I say give 4 a shot. I really like 4. Beyond that, it gets kind of murky and kind of up to your own discretion, but seasons 1 to 4 to me are very watchable, very solid, and the first 3 seasons are just what is considered to be the golden age of the show. It's often quoted as being called the golden age of SpongeBob. So, it's got a really nice opening shot of Bikini Bottom, and we hear the French narrator, which is voiced by Tom Kenny. The French narrator being a staple of the series, he opening and closing narrates some of the episodes, not all of them, but just the ones that they can find to write him in, and he does a fantastic job of that, by the way. It's to the point where newer seasons almost overuse it, because they've kind of brought him back, and they've put Tom Kenny or somebody into a diving suit, and they have him just doing things because they have more interactions with humans because of the movies. That's its whole other discussion, that's its whole other thing. But early on, he was a staple of the series, kind of narrating over some of the introductions to things in this universe that we hadn't seen. Does a really solid job of that. So, yeah. Very, very solid opening. We've got the nice shot of what looks to be a whole bunch of coral and parts, and you see Bikini Bottom, which is made up of a bunch of skyscrapers made out of what appear to be like broken mufflers and propellers. I never really quite understood what the houses were, if they were supposed to be mufflers or if they were supposed to be something else. I don't know, but really nice aesthetic, very unique, very creative. Everything has portholes, so everything's very oceanic themed. They drive boats, but they still have paved roads, but they're three-wheeled boats and trucks that are boats, same style. Very, very cool stuff. Really like the world of the underwater that Bikini Bottom's in, which is supposed to be our world as well. There's real world locations. There are humans. It's established pretty early on that there are humans in the universe, and they're playing into that a little bit more. But you get just the most basic introduction to our setting, and SpongeBob getting ready for applying for the Krusty Krab. Fun fact, there was a original introduction made for this episode, as it's the pilot. It never aired on TV, but it's available on YouTube to go find. In fact, I might link it down in the description so you can go watch it, because there are people who have remastered it, and it uses a theme that you hear in the title card of another episode. I think it's really spectacular. I just found it, believe it or not, I just found it yesterday as I was looking up just kind of old information about the SpongeBob pilot and things surrounding it, that sort of thing. Really, really neat. So I'll probably end up linking that in the description of wherever this video ends up. Obviously YouTube and other places, maybe Rumble, who knows. But very nice introduction. The animation is very solid. It's old school sort of cell animation. Really, really nice visually. Definitely catches your eye. It's got that hand-drawn feel to it, and really, really nice. It's something was lost in the transition to digital that was really special. Something visual flair seems to have really gone away. You can do a whole lot more in terms of detail, but a lot of the visual flair was gone. It's cool seeing the show back in this style that so many 90s shows had, and it definitely gives you the feeling that it is a product of the 90s, of the very late 90s, the tail end of the 90s, pretty much being 99. So, but it is a solid episode. We don't learn a whole lot about SpongeBob as a character outside of some of his most basic traits and just his ambition to be a fry cook at the Krusty Krab, which is eventually going to be pivotal to his character. Eventually we're going to see that, and I will say this repeatedly throughout whatever SpongeBob videos I do, he is not a good fry cook. He's not a great fry cook. He is an exceptional fry cook. I mean, he is a master fry cook, and the show, in no uncertain terms, makes this abundantly clear throughout its entire run. He is doing things in fry cooking that didn't seem possible. He makes a very mundane and often begrudged job look glamorous by being a fry cook. He makes it look like a job that people would want, and he takes a whole lot of pride in being a fry cook, and we see that towards the end of this episode. We see those skills on full display, and the show consistently depicts that as being one of his greatest traits and one of his coolest skills. Something that I've always liked about him, seeing somebody take pride in what they do for a living. It's very rare these days to see that, and even as a kid, somebody who wasn't making a living, I appreciated that. It was inspiring. It really was inspiring to see somebody who had a skill and was able to monetize that skill. Granted, I'm sure it's only minimum wage, but still, it's obviously enough for him to pay for his pineapple house, which I'm not sure what heating electricity costs for that. I don't know how that all works, but there's no must all be underground wiring, because there's no overhead telephone wires or anything like that. So it is what it is. It's interesting to think of what time period the show would be in. But in later episodes, they show more modern technology. So I think we can just assume it's, whatever era that the show was produced in, that's the era that it's in. So I haven't seen any interviews with the showrunners or writers. So I don't know how they do that in terms of timeline setting, but it is what it is. But yeah, very solid episode. We don't glean too much about the characters themselves other than basic motivations surrounding that episodes. We do glean from Squidward that he doesn't like SpongeBob, at least initially. We don't know what his relationship to SpongeBob ultimately is until, well, we find out as soon as the next episode that he's his neighbor, but we don't know that in Help Wanted. So that's interesting. He's just apparently an acquaintance. So, but we get introduced to him. We get introduced to Mr. Krabs, who we don't know much about other than he owns the Krusty Krab. That's pretty much all we know. And Patrick, who we learn is SpongeBob's best friend, but we don't know much about him. But we do see that he is a good, loyal friend. And that's a theme that's running throughout the series as well, although many of their character traits are tweaked in later seasons, but in these earlier seasons, especially season 1, you see their friendship dynamic work really, really, really well. But from start to finish, this is a solid episode. Ends with a little fun musical number as SpongeBob's making Krabby Patties, set to that, I think it's Tiptoe Through the Tulips by Tiny Tim. I think that's what it's called. I think it's Tiptoe Through the Tulips with Me. I think that's a full title. May he rest in peace. Also, may Steven Hillenburg, the creator of this show, rest in peace. But it's a solid little musical number, and I'm not a big fan of musical numbers, but it fits the scenario incredibly well, and it doesn't go throughout the whole episode or longer than it needs to. So, but it's a great visual display of what SpongeBob is capable of as a fry cook. It's a great visual piece. So, very solid pilot. There's a lot of times a show will do a pilot, and that pilot will be so radically different tonally and from everything else. There'll still be a lot of undefined things about what they're going to do going forward. That the pilot is just sort of an afterthought. It's it's just a bonus on a DVD. But this is something definitely worth watching because I think it sets the tone very well, and it's ambiguous enough to where you can infer certain things that become traits later on. It's a very solid pilot episode. I don't think it should be skipped for any reason, even though Tea at the Tree Dome is technically the first syndicated episode. Help Wanted shouldn't be ignored, and that's why I put it in here, because it's a proof of concept, but it works so incredibly well as a proof of concept. It works to get you hooked on this world, these characters. It is a tremendous introduction. I really like it. So, moving on to Reef Blower, which is a short, and the interesting thing about this episode to note is that it is a 3-act structure as opposed to a 2-act structure, which is what they do going forward. So you've got 1A, 1B, and 1C, where it's usually A and B episodes. So they do on occasion do A, B, and C episodes, but they're few and far between, and it's definitely not the norm. I think they do it every once in a while once they get an idea for a short that they can do. Because I was trying to think as I was doing sort of the preparation for this episode, how many other episodes do A, B, and C, and there's at least a couple of them in later seasons. So it's been a more recent thing that they've brought back. The rest of, I don't believe for the rest of seasons 1, 2, and 3 that they ever do A, B, and C again. I don't recall. I could be completely wrong on that, and if I am, I apologize, but my memory is a bit fuzzy on that area. But this, to me, shows how they were being more experimental. So it'd be very easy to overlook Reef Blower as just being a short, but I think it's a fantastic short. It's completely reliant on the visuals, the sound effects, and the music. There's no voice acting in it other than some small sounds, but it is a very fun, just sort of visual gag short. The basic premise being that Squidward, who we now know lives next to SpongeBob in the Easter Island head, comes out onto his lawn, sees a shell, which is, I guess, this universe's equivalent of a leaf, tries to sweep it over into SpongeBob's yard and act like, he didn't do it, as he's whistling, and SpongeBob looks out, sees his lawn, It's all clean except for that. So he goes into his garage, gets his reef blower, and hilarity ensues. And this short sets the tone for SpongeBob and Squidward's interactions with each other in the neighborhood, and usually how the endeavor almost always goes positive for SpongeBob and almost always negative for Squidward. And I think it's very important that these things are established early on. And that's why I really like this short, because even though it's not voice acted, it's got a great score, it's got great sound effects, it's got great visual gags, really great visual gags. I mean, for crying out loud, SpongeBob sucks up the entire Pacific Ocean into the thing. He puts the thing on suck and it sucks the whole ocean down, and Squidward ends up choking, and then his reef blower gets overblown and explodes at the end, and it ends with SpongeBob's lawn ultimately being clean and shiny, but Squidward's being covered in mounds of sand. And then at the very end, as Squidward's covered in a mound of sand, the shell that was originally in his yard ends up floating onto his nose. Just a great sort of, start to finish gag. Really, really good. Really, really good. I think it's definitely worth not skipping over. So then we move on to the first regular syndicated episode, which is Tea at the Tree Dome, which is our introduction to another character in Sandy Cheeks, being the first mammal of the series, wearing a sort of specialized diving suit. And this is a good episode because it showcases several different things about the characters. It expands on SpongeBob and Patrick a little bit, not too much, but it expands enough to know what type of characters that they actually are beyond just, SpongeBob's ambition to be a fry cook or Patrick just being a good best friend. It expands upon who they are as characters. We see that SpongeBob is a kind-hearted, resolute, always wants to do the right thing type of character. We see that Patrick is a loyal friend and somewhat of an idiot, but that's not terribly well established here. When SpongeBob goes to Patrick for advice on how to interact with Sandy, he completely misreads the situation and tries to give the best advice based on his knowledge. And we don't know to the extent of his intelligence at this point. We don't know that he's basically just an idiot. But it is interesting to note that he understands what the phrase putting on airs means. That's something very wildly inconsistent with later parts of his character that wouldn't know what most phrases mean, let alone how to get up in the morning. I mean, good grief. So we just see him being portrayed as just a really good, sort of honest friend, trying to make this interaction between SpongeBob and Sandy go really, really well. And we see hilarity ensue because, SpongeBob ends up in the situation where he's in an environment without water, he can't breathe, he doesn't even know what air is, but he brags about how great he thinks air is, even though he doesn't know, because he's trying to impress his new friend, and he's not being malicious in his dishonesty, but he is trying to be endearing. And we see this trait a lot from his character, and I think that that's a really positive thing. Obviously you don't want to lie to people, and he learns the lesson that you shouldn't lie about something you don't know about because it could cost you your life. But we see him being such a kind-hearted, endearing character that people just want to be around, or he just wants to make friends with people. Yeah, he comes across as a little annoying in some of his character traits, but he's kind-hearted, and he draws other good people to himself as a result. We really see that in play here. And we see a little bit of Patrick's stupidity on display when he just rushes into the tree dome trying to, push SpongeBob through, thinking he's just having social difficulties, when in reality he's just struggling to freaking breathe. So it's really funny. The visual gags of them choking on air is just hilarious. Patrick in particular, oh man, that visual gag is burned into my memory. Just the way he's on the ground and cough. Oh my gosh, it sounds morbid if you've never seen it, but you just have to watch it to understand visually how well they played that gag off. And it's got a really sort of kind of quirky ending where Sandy ends up getting them, these these water helmets that they use for the rest of the series. Although these ones are kind of upside down. They're like fish bowls in a way that she can fill from the top, where in the future they're just kind of like her suit's helmet. So they changed the design of that as they were going on. But in the beginning, they had them do that, and then they end up all drinking tea. She ends up putting the tea bags in their water. Goes, hope you all like your tea strong. And it ends with them sipping tea together, and Patrick's telling SpongeBob to put his pinky up because that was a part of the beginning of the episode. Was Patrick was basically saying, if you want to be fancy, hold up your pinky, because she's just a fancy individual. That's what he's gleaming from the information SpongeBob's giving him. It's just a really fun episode. I don't have a lot bad to say about it, if anything, really. Just really well animated. They do a couple of shots where there's some solid paintings and close-ups of SpongeBob's face as he's drying up, and you can see an animated sort of bead of sweat running down his face, and it's just really, really well done. The show does a great job early on of doing these solid matte paintings of up close of the characters in detail, and this was, I think, one of the first examples of that, and it was done really, really well. But overall, very, very solid episode. All 3 parts are very well. They all kind of stand out on their own, but together as a full watch, I think it's really solid. It's really solid. There's not a whole lot that will leave you feeling bored or unentertained, and it's a great introduction to the series. And there's still so much great stuff to come. It really makes you excited for, I wonder what's next, There's not a whole lot of shows that do that anymore for me, honestly. At least not in the animation realm. It seems like in the animation realm today, a lot of shows just kind of go for, sort of the cheap kiddie laughs, and they really insult kids' intelligence, where back in the day, the humor was pretty highbrow in some areas. There was a lot of gags that only adults would get, but, kids still laughed along, kids still were entertained. But the show has definitely shifted towards, while it still has a lot more of the more intelligent humor, it's shifted a lot more towards the over-the-top elements of each character and over-the-top cartoony gags in a way that just feels like it's being dumbed down for kids. And I can only imagine that that's a result of some sort of focus testing, some sort of focus group or in-house evaluations. I'm not entirely sure, but whatever conclusion they've come to, I really think it's the wrong one, because these first 3 seasons do a very good job of balancing the humor and the character traits. They don't overblow them like they do, post season 4. It just feels like the characters are just exaggerated to the nth degree. Their traits that they're known for are just absolutely blown out of proportion compared to everything that came before. And it's very jarring if you go from, like, say, season 1 to season 6 or 7. It's just poof. It's like they're an explosion of just obnoxious, over-the-top character traits. And I really wish they would go back and sort of tone it down and understand that kids' attention spans will hold on as long as there's enough visually there for them to be able to, interact with it, as it were. Because I think what we got out of this as kids, those of us who watched this original run, we were able to see the visuals, and we didn't get all of the jokes, but many of the jokes were enough to make sense, at least if you were of a certain age. They didn't insult our intelligence because we were young. They didn't talk down to us. They just, it just did its own thing. And it worked, So definitely a solid episode. Would highly recommend it. I'm going to move on to episode 2 in another video. If you guys like this and want this to continue, I will definitely at least do the first 3 seasons and possibly the 4th. But let me know what your thoughts are on this episode and this season if you want. Leave comments below. Let me know if you want to see more, what your memories of the series are, if you have any. I know a lot of people my age really were attached to this show, and this show was a tremendous success, largely because of us. I think we really watched this show as it aired. I remember when new episodes would air during the weekday, and it was a really special thing. It was a special time to be a kid in the late 90s, early 2000s, Even in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of kid-centric programming that there really wasn't before. There were Saturday morning cartoons, but they kept evolving, eventually getting their own networks, and we got, live action sitcoms for kids. We got animated series as kids, not just during Saturday morning, but, in the afternoon after school, and, even till we went to bed. There was all sorts of stuff. And SpongeBob was one of those shows where, once it was in syndication, they started airing reruns on top of each other. And it was just an entire, hour or 2 or 3 that they would just air the show. And they continue to do that now. It's saturated most of Nickelodeon's airtime. And it's such a watchable show. Again, at least these first 4 seasons, in my opinion. I know some people think that it's only the first 3, but I really like season 4. It's not as consistent as 1, 2, and 3, but it's got a lot of redeeming episodes, enough for me to consider it an extension of that golden age. But anyways, that's going to do it for me for this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed this sort of different take here, and I will see you guys in the next video I do. This has been Super Koopa. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.